going to talk a little bit about my research process and how I came to creating this kind of crazy creation. But I will start with a short reading. I'll just read the first 2 paragraphs, just to give you a taste of the book. I'll read from this one here. I think they're all the same. Most of them are the same. Chapter 1. Elizabeth, New Jersey, April 17th, 1975. It was just after midnight in birthing room 4C, and Dr. Sherman, the mustached obstetrician presiding over the delivery, was sweating lightly into his cotton underwear, holding out his hands like a beggar, ready to receive the imminent cranium. Without warning, the room was plunged into total darkness. Okay, that's all for you. You can read the rest. So the question is, we look at this book here, and it's beautiful and bound, and it looks like it was sort of always meant to be. But of course, this was not the case, and for over 5 years, it sort of languished in my brain, on my computer, and on the walls of my office as this sort of chaotic beast that I wasn't sure was a book, or is it one book, is it 5 books? One of my readers is here, Michael Lucas. Thank you for slogging through it.
Thank you.
And you show it, I think I showed it to him, and I was like, he's like, what are your questions? And I was like, is it a book? And he's like, yeah, it's a book. Yeah, it reads like a book. And I was like, yes. So there's at least I am always kind of racked with self-doubt about, is this thing a cohesive creation? And then, your publisher gives you a kind of advanced copy, and they're like, it looks like a book. It's a book. So how does this thing come to be? How does it begin with this series of kind of ideas, phrases that get caught in the kind of sieve of my mind? I'm a collector of things, of images, of phrases, of ideas. So I would put them up on my wall and be very unsure of how I was going to use them. So for instance, electricity is a liquid. Up here. This came from 1840s science textbook when they thought that electricity was a liquid. And I love this idea, particularly in relation to human beings as these sort of wet batteries. And that idea of us as electrical beings and sort of extensions of radios and televisions was something that haunted me as I wrote this. So one of the things that I always tell my students is that if you're a writer, your job is not just on the page, but it's a 24/7 job in that you have to learn how to watch the world and learn how to collect things from the world, because everything is fair game. Tonight's fair game. I might write my next book about a book reading. So one of the things that was the seedling for this book actually happened while I was writing the first book. And that happens, right? You're engaged in one project, and then something boils up from the hi, welcome, from somewhere else, and you have to kind of put it away in the filing cabinet of your mind and be like, okay, I want to use this, not now, but I'm going to use this. And this happened in Prague. I was in Prague, and I stumbled across a puppet festival, as one does in Prague. I think there's a constant puppet festival going on in Prague. And I was wandering down some back alley and came into this little staircase downwards, and I remember there was a line of people, and like a good human, I started waiting in line, even though I didn't know what I was waiting for. And when I got to the front of the line, there was this little box with a sort of cape or a curtain, and you could see that there was the shadow of a kind of puppeteer behind the box. And I wasn't sure what I had to do, and so I kind of put the curtain above my head and looked in this little peephole. And I saw the lights came up, there was some music, and there was a tiny man about this big, and he was sitting in a chair, and he was reading a book. It was a tiny puppet. And the whole thing probably lasted 4 or 5 minutes, and I was completely transfixed. It was a transcendent moment for me. And it had something to do with this notion that here was this little thing that was not alive. It was an insentient little creature, but it became alive, and it became more alive than any human. And that sort of leap from a thing that's dead to something that is so recognizably human has this confrontational moment for the viewer. And people have written about this a lot, but it's why we come back to puppets a lot. It's this uncanny valley. And so I started chasing the puppet. It was almost like I was chasing a drug. I was chasing that little man reading that book. And I went to a lot of puppet shows. I went to a lot of puppet festivals. I saw a lot of bad puppetry. Puppetry can be real bad. When it's bad, it's bad, you know. But when it's good, it's the best, you know. So just these little scenes, you know, these little things where you get this flicker of life. Sometimes it's the scale, because the scale is either so small or so big that throws you off, and you stumble for a second. But that humanness, where there was so clearly no humanness, it keeps us thirsty, I think. And it keeps us chasing. And I think I wanted to write about, I knew I wanted to write about that, but how do you write on a page, which is, you know, made of ink and dead wood, about something that is inherently an experiential moment, right? It's about being there, it's about being down that dark alleyway, it's about, you know, hearing the rustle of the puppeteer, it's about seeing the little man turn the page. How do you write about that that moment of seeing when it's kind of recreating the moment? So that was a challenge for me. I started watching a lot of puppet films. Does anyone know these guys? The Brothers Quaid. They're totally whacked out, strange, identical twins from Philly. They look like they're from outer space. They have moved somewhere. I think they're living somewhere in Europe now. But they made these series of incredible stop-motion animation films that are made from kind of doll parts and found objects. They make these wonderful, beautiful, you know, strange creations. Their most famous film is called The Street of Crocodiles. It's based on the Bruno Schulz book, which is one of my favorite books in the world. He's a Polish guy. It's kind of a dark, surrealistic, very funny book. This is them shirtless in their studio in 1986 making The Street of Crocodiles. And the thing about stop-motion animation is that it requires you to have a deep level of kind of geologic attention, because every frame you have to create and manifest. So a blink, creating a blink, which is, you know, you have to think about, is this a 20 frame blink, is this a 25 frame blink? I mean, you're thinking at that level of detail, and a blink will take you 2 hours to do. So you, I think, inhabit characters on a pretty profound level, and I often think about that when I'm writing, you know, word for word, like, what would this be in stop motion animation time? And I think that, you know, that's the time of poets. That's how poets think too. So I wanted to show you just a 20-second snippet from Street of Crocodiles, just so you can kind of get the mise en scène of the world. I love so many parts about this world, the kind of strings and little gears that you're not quite sure what they're doing, but clearly need to be stopped with a finger. And this weird man who's wearing ill-fitting clothing in this sort of dingy glass house that you're not sure is anywhere or nowhere. And so this kind of, this landscape I wanted again to kind of recreate somehow. I often tell writers that they shouldn't limit their influences to just textual things. For me, art is really important influence. Both my parents are artists. I love Kiefer. I just saw his amazing show at the Royal Academy in London, and he's known for, you know, huge canvas work, right? His studios are literally acres wide, and he now makes these, you know, 12-foot canvases out of steel and gold and God knows what, or like buys an old World War II bomber and throws wheat in it, and it's art, you know. But his early days, he started quite small, and he did a lot of scrapbooking. And this was kind of one of his most amazing and sort of really struck me is, I couldn't shake it out of my mind. It's called Der Himmel, and it's 260 pages of just cutouts of little pieces of the sky. Page after page of this, just that he cuts out these little slivers. And it strikes me as just such a beautiful and crazy act. I don't know if this notebook was meant to be displayed. I think it's part of a private collection, and that is even cool, like to make something that is not displayed. Occasionally it is, we're lucky to see it. But also the kind of, the gesture of capturing the sky in little slivers, you know, this thing that is infinite, and showing us just these little, not even pieces of the sky, pictures of the sky, again and again and again, strikes me as sort of deeply novelistic. It's what we do as writers, right? We're giving you little peeks into a world and asking you to fill in the spaces around the slivers. And I just couldn't take my eyes off it. I don't know. It felt like at once a totally futile task and also like deeply moving and beautiful. Another seminal springboard for this book is Heart of Darkness, which I read in high school, I think, and I didn't fully appreciate it, but now I've sort of returned again and again to it, and I read it once a year. It's incredibly short for how dense it feels. I mean, I admire Conrad in many ways, the fact that he didn't come to English until like mid-20s, and so I feel like he approaches every sentence kind of through the back door, and every sentence sort of surprises you mid-clause. And I often think about that, because those of us who grew up with English, we can become lazy, we're like, I'm just going to do it the easy way. But, there's a chance for every sentence to be a revelation, I think. There's always, you can shift the gears in the sentence. But I also appreciate Heart of Darkness because there's a whole story around the story. The text has become seminal in many ways, and, the whole post-colonial critique is really important. It's inspired many, many retellings, which I'm also interested in. Why do we tell stories and then feel moved to tell them again? Probably the most famous retelling is Apocalypse Now. And recently I think about 10 or 15 years ago, they came out with the director's cut, which is never a good idea, right? The director's cut is always worse than the original cut. There was a reason why they didn't let him, and I think Apocalypse Now is about, it was called Apocalypse Now Redux. Was about like 6 hours too long. Did anyone see the Redux version? It included, among other things, it included, I think, like a 35-minute self-contained, it's called the French plantation scene. And it was a good thing it was cut, because it just stopped the narrative dead in its tracks. And yet, I'm so drawn to it. So basically, Martin Sheen and the soldiers are going down the Mekong, and the mist part, and they come across these French colonials, that all have their guns. And these colonials are there like 50 years too late. They should have left, long ago. They should have left before the French were involved in their own, French war. But here they are, defending, their home. This is our home. And they invite the one of the, I think chef or someone Mr. Clean was dead, was killed, so they bury him. And they invite these American soldiers to this lavish kind of colonial buffet and talking about, we fucked up here, why are you doing the same thing? And then one by one, each of the French people leave disgusted with themselves and disgusted with the world, leaving only Martin Sheen and the beautiful daughter. And of course they go up and make love and smoke opium, and then, the scene ends. But I love how this is like an orphaned scene. It didn't exist in the movie, and here it is, sort of neither here nor there in the Redux, almost like the French colonials themselves. It's this kind of ghostly scene that is floating out there, and I couldn't shake it. I love this idea of these colonials persisting despite all signs saying, "Get out of here! Get the fuck out of here!" So that was somewhere in the back of my mind. Herzog is big for me. I love Herzog. I love his contentious relationship with his crazy Starkinski, who looks like a third Brothers Quay. He looks like the missing triplet. If you haven't seen it, there's a wonderful documentary called My Best Fiend, which documents Herzog and Kinski's totally bonkers relationship. I mean, it was a very creative relationship, but like at one time, I forget what movie it is, but Kinski threatens to leave, in the mid-shootings. They're somewhere filming in some wet jungle, and Herzog goes into his actor's tent with a gun and says, "If you leave this set, I'll kill you," And it was like, this is crazy. And then Kinski goes out and does the best scene of his life, But Aguirre, Wrath of God is this amazing movie about, Kinski plays this sick conquistador, and the final scene is he's on this raft. Everyone in his party is dead, shot by arrows except him, and he's on this raft with a bunch of monkeys and a cannon, and he hasn't given up the dream. I'll just show you the last minute.
Wir halten durch. Ich bin der Zorn Gottes. Wer sonst ist mit mir?
I love that raft. I mean, just like, utter chaos. And the cannon, why did they put a cannon on there? If they shot that cannon, the whole thing would explode. It reminds me of a scene in Heart of Darkness where they go by, Marlowe and the ship goes by this French man-of-war ship just shelling the bush, and there's nothing there, but they just keep shelling the jungle. This kind of crazy, futile task, which again strikes me as weirdly what us writers do. We sort of shell the bush. But yeah, that broken raft of dreams. So I think I received a piece of advice from a teacher of mine that she said, write what you know. And I've done my best to sort of ignore that over the course of my books. I keep writing about what I don't know. But the good thing about that is that it forces you to go out into the world and sort of learn about it. So I did a lot of going forth. One of the things I'm obsessed with is strange museums and also bad museums. I like really bad museums. I like county historical societies that are totally mislabeled. You're not sure what's an exhibit and whether you're actually just in some guy's house, and this is like just all his crap. Because I think the worse the museum, the more you're asked to fill in the spaces in between the exhibits. So for this book, I dragged my poor family to a lot of these technological museums. There seems to be a large proliferation of them in Eastern Europe, just filled with sort of outdated equipment, none of which you're sure exactly what it did. But I just like to be near these old machines. Just cabinets filled with old telephone receivers. Why? Why would you do that? I don't know, but I love it. What does this do? No one knows. But I don't know. I love the exhibiting, the care, the curation, the display of strange, old, outdated things. I feel like it's kind of where we will all end up. Perhaps the craziest place I went to of all my travels was actually New Jersey. And specifically the Meadowlands, which is this swath of swampland. I don't know if you've taken a train west out of Manhattan, but you kind of emerge out of the tunnel and suddenly you're in this crazy, swamp. It's like, you're like, where am I? And it's only about a stone's throw from the city. And it's a land of, I think it's flyover territory. It's filled with interchanges and train yards and parking lots and warehouses and chemical plants. And I think of it as the great backstage to New York City, to the theater of the city. It's where all the props are kept, right? And it's like, okay, we need more oranges. Okay, get them in here. You know, it's like, this is how the magic of Manhattan works, where you can buy anything you want at an Upper East Side bodega. It's all from the Meadowlands. And among other things, there's a lot of mosquitoes there because of the salt water, but I learned, I was driving around a lot and I got into all kinds of trouble just driving down these frontage roads and into God knows what. And I learned as I was being bit by these mosquitoes that actually there's a lot of radio towers there because salt water propagates signal. So almost every New York radio station has a transmission site there. And it's amazing. It's amazing the access that you can get by just saying you're a writer. You don't have to flash any badge. You don't even have to say what you're affiliated. You just say I'm a writer, and they're like, oh, come in. And this happened with one of the stations here. This guy Bob Janney was like, yeah, come on in. And he showed me all the equipment. This is an oscilloscope, which I'm still not quite sure what it does, but I put it in the book. That's the great thing about being a novelist. You just have to learn just enough so you can fake it. But if in a pinch, I don't think I could run a proper radio station. But it was great research because the main character, Rada Radmanovic, works at a radio station inspired by this visit. One of the strangest places I visited in New Jersey was the Xanadu Mall, which was built in a great act of hubris in the early noughts or aughts, I don't know what we're calling them, to be the largest mall in the country, bigger even than the Mall of America in Minnesota. And named appropriately Xanadu, just like Citizen Kane's Broken Warehouse of Dreams, this thusly became New Jersey's Broken Warehouse of Dreams. And of course the famous Coleridge poem which features in the book. And Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. I don't know if that sunless sea is the Hackensack River, but in 2008, Lehman Brothers, you might remember them, were the primary backers of the Xanadu Mall, and they went belly up, and the whole project collapsed. So I showed up to the chain link fence and said, I'm a writer, and they're like, come in, see our broken mall of dreams. And this is me in my safety vest and helmet. Behind me, this was where the 435-foot Ferris wheel was going to go with the Pepsi symbol that was going to be visible from Long Island. Too bad that didn't go in. This is what a mall looks like that's empty. In front of each of these spaces, there was like a sad little chair with a sign that said, future home of J. Crew. I don't know if that sign is still there because the mall's still empty. But it's crazy to see a church of retail without any of the retail in it because you really feel the emptiness of the place. Xanadu was going to be one of these entertainment complexes. You don't just shop there, you kind of go there to be entertained all day. And there was many different zones of 6 different stages. There was an adventure zone with an indoor skydiving tube. And craziest of all, an indoor ski slope, which when I went in July, it was 95 degrees out, there was snow on the ground, but no one there. And I was like, wow, what have we become? So they were kind of trying to chase their own, outrun their own hubris. So they renamed the mall in an act of rebranding the Xanadu Meadowlands Mall, which I think then they just ditched Xanadu. It became the Meadowlands Mall. And then finally, it is now, no joke, called the American Dream Meadowlands Mall. Which is one of the worst names in the world for a mall. But at this point, I think they can't see beyond anything. They're just trying to get it opened. So it really has come kind of full circle and is our modern day Citizen Kane's Xanadu. I went further afield, and I did the more traditional research where you kind of read about a place, you go to the place, and then you write about it. And this happened with Cambodia. And I was writing about when the Khmer Rouge was there, and I read this amazing book by Philip Short. And in the back of the book, I found this map, and as you probably know, I like maps. My first book was about a 12-year-old obsessed with maps. And I found on this map, with my little eagle eyes, this strange Camp 808, which was not mentioned in the rest of the book, and was not mentioned anywhere in the rest of the world. So I was like, did Philip Short get drunk one night and just create this imaginary 808 out of nothing? And I did more research, and I found that actually, no one else called it 808, but this was the place. This was the crazy place where the Khmer Rouge, after implementing, one of the worst genocides in the history of humankind, murdering over 2 million of their people, the Vietnamese drove them out very easily, and they went here to lick their wounds and sort of regroup and represent themselves as a viable political party in the next democratic election. Can you imagine? Just kind of sweeping a genocide at, our politicians you think are bad, like these guys actually killed 2 million people, and they're like, vote for us! They literally had like a PR, they hired a PR campaign, and this was all done from this Camp 808. So I was like, I have to go here. And this, I hired a guy who was crazy enough to take me there, and it's a beautiful place. It's one of the most beautiful places I've been. It's now a guest house, and you can dine on these little beautiful things, these beautiful little bungalows. There's an amazing vista, and I think they chose this place for strategic purposes so they could see who was going to attack them. But I like to think that there was moments of sort of deep contemplation where they were looking over the beautiful plains of Cambodia and sort of wondering what they had done. I discovered this amazing little man with many heads and faces, and wondered if that was new or whether that was there then. So I got the feeling of this place. I soaked it in. I took my notes and wrote about it. I also did it backwards. Specifically with Belgrade. I wrote about Belgrade before I had ever been. I created a sort of fictional, imaginary geography. I wrote about what I think the smells would be in the morning, what I think this particular square would look like. And then I went to Belgrade and saw the real Belgrade. And it was interesting. I mean, I took a lot of pictures. This is the River Sana, which features heavily in the book. This is a square where there's a scene. This mural of this kind of guy walking up a pathway into a door, and you can kind of, his looks decapitated from the shadows. That's in the book, so that was good. I got some real life in there. I thought for sure this stocking stall was going to go in my book. Didn't go in the book. Same with this playground. These little capsules. I thought there was going to be a scene, but they just didn't make it. This is my wife Katie dining with my Serbian translator, who was a wonderful guy. And this is this cafe is what I fictionalized in the book. But ultimately, I was actually more interested in my Belgrade, my fictional Belgrade, which is kind of problematic, but kind of not. I mean, I think when we're writing about places, we're not actually writing about that place. We're writing about a sort of shadow place. We don't want to get it viciously wrong, but this realization freed me up to write about a place, but also write about a culture that was, deeply problematic and complicated. And I at first felt like, how am I going to write about this war when I don't know all the tiny little nuances that someone who grew up with it did? But I think being an outsider gives you sort of some insight that if you're too close, you don't have. You can make missteps, but you can also have, you can tell the truth in a way. At least that's what I tell myself. I had this crazy sort of really surreal experience where I was visiting with my Serbian publisher, and some journalists got wind that my next book was going to take place in Serbia, so they all came, like clucking little hens, and they say, "What do you know about the war in Serbia?" And I was like, "Oh God, I can't. There's no way to answer this question, correctly." So I panicked, and I was like, all roads lead to Belgrade. To understand Europe, you have to understand Serbia." And they're like, this one, he knows. And they took their pens and sort of, I saw them knighting me, and they're like, "You can write great Serbian novel," I was like, "Oh, thanks." So I tried to. the story will tell you what it wants. This is true for me, and this is also an important truth of my writing. And this happened actually in Bosnia. A big part of the book takes place in this town called Visegrad, which was made famous by Ivo Andrić's book, The Bridge on the Drina. This is the famous bridge. It was built by the Ottomans. A beautiful bridge is the Turkish bridge. Very symbolic. It's been destroyed, it's been built, rebuilt. This was the place during the Yugoslav War where the Bosnian Serbs took a lot of Muslims and shot them and pushed them over the, into the River Drina. So it's been reused and used and reused in all kinds of good and horrible ways. My publisher said, "Oh, if you're going to Visegrad, there's a little secret you have to know about. There is this beautiful hammam, which is Turkish hot springs in the forest. Not many people know about it." He's like, "But you, I will tell you." So he drew a little map and he said, "Here's the town. You go 7 kilometers northeast into this little valley, and you go to this resort. It's a very ugly resort. Don't pay attention. Just get the keys from the desk, and you say the secret password, and then you go up the slope, and you get to the hammam, and it's awesome." And this. Sure enough, we follow our instructions, and this is the little domed building, and we went inside. Opened the rattly lock, closed it behind us, and we were in history. We were soaking in history. 500, 600-year-old place. And can you imagine the Ottomans doing the same exact thing? And it was glorious, just like they had said. And afterwards, we had to return the keys, and we were a little bit hungry, so we went back to the ugly communist-era resort, which looks like an overturned cruise ship. And this is me in the cafeteria, looking a bit dazed as one is after a soak. But there was something spooky, but I don't know, there was something wrong about this place. It wasn't just that the cafeteria was completely empty, or that there was like weird Romanian women in slippers kind of constantly going by to the hot baths. Both my wife and I didn't feel right, and we couldn't put our finger on it. And I went back, when I got back to New York, I started doing a little research, and what I found out was deeply disturbing. This hotel, and any Bosnian would tell you this, was probably the most famous quote-unquote rape hotel. Hundreds of women were kept here over the course of the war and tortured and repeatedly raped and killed. This was what it was known for. And obviously the new management is not broadcasting that and has tried to, but the weird thing was my Serbian publisher didn't mention this, like get the keys at the rape hotel. You would think they would have at least made that part of the narrative, but the fact that it was totally omitted made me feel part of the ignorance, part of this kind of cultural amnesia, and complicit in this kind of deeply unsettling way. That I was just another tourist coming through and like, scrambled eggs, please, and not acknowledging or somehow honoring the history that had gone on here. And the weird thing was that this exact experience had happened to another person. Her name was Kim. She was Australian. She looked in the guidebook at Visegrad, and she was like, "Where should I stay?" And she's like, "Oh, there's this hot springs." So she stayed there, couldn't sleep the whole night. She couldn't put her finger on it. And then when she got back to Australia, she discovered the same thing and had that same sort of guilt by association. And she wrote a play about it called 7 Kilometers Northeast. I just discovered this, after I'd gone there. And this is her. It's a one-woman show, and sort of it was her attempt to kind of honor the women who don't have a voice, who suffered there, and there's no memorial there. Her one-woman show was in turn retold and remade into a movie by a Bosnian woman, into a film called For Those Who Can Tell No Tales. And this struck me as so sort of amazing that both she and I had this exact same sort of profound feeling of guilt, and the only way that we could answer that was with an act of art making. And her art making was in turn met by another act of art making. That we can retell these stories and somehow reclaim our past is something. It's deeply moving and deeply human. I think we make it our own in some way, in a little bit of a way. I also went to the Congo, which is really hard to go to. these days. Really, and it's really expensive because there's no infrastructure and no tourism there. I wanted to get to Kisangani, which is the inner station in Heart of Darkness. It's Kurtz's inner station. But there was unrest there. There was no way that anyone was going to take me there. So I only ended up going to Goma, which is itself a weird place. It's where all the human aid, all the NGOs are. It's like a clearinghouse. I mean, there's like probably 200 aid organizations there. They've been there forever. They're going to be there forever. It's a really strange, it's like this cycle of aid dependence. It's an institution now. The culture shock for me was not going from America to Africa. It was going from Rwanda to Congo. Rwanda is like a first world country. Kigali's and skyscrapers, roads are perfect. Rwandans culturally are quite reserved. They've been called the Germans of Central Africa. If you take a bus in Rwanda, everyone's sort of quietly sitting right. As soon as you cross the border into Congo, there are no roads. Every road is broken. People are hanging out the windows. It's a crazy collision of cultures there, really at the border, which is amazing. So I did all this research in Goma, and then the book tells me I don't want to go to Goma. I want to go to Matadi on the complete opposite side, and I'm like, I can't go back to Congo. So I had to sort of again create a parallel Matadi, which was half Goma, half my experiences in other parts of Africa. It's a sort of Frankenstein Matadi, but that's okay, I think. So I'll just finish by giving you a little infographic, because everyone loves infographics, of the evolution of this book, which was not a point A to point B narrative straight line at all. I didn't set out and be like, I'm going to write a 5-part novel with images and a fake bibliography. No, this it arose, the book, as it told me what it wanted to be. So I started actually in what is now part 3 in the book. It's present-day New Jersey. Radar, our hero, is mid-30s, struggling with love, lives at home with his parents, works in a radio station. Bosnia kind of snuck in there, and I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the relationship between these two? How do I tell this story? Is it sort of in a checkerboard pattern, which I never really like as a sort of formalism. It feels kind of constructed to me, this kind of alternating narratives. So the book told me, you know what, Radar's been through some shit. You got to start in the beginning of Radar. You really got to start with his birth. And I resisted that for a while, because so many books begin with births, like Midnight's Children and Middlesex, and it seems obvious and done. But the book was like, we're beginning with a birth. You can't argue. So I settled on this kind of 3-part structure. New Jersey 1975, Bosnia, then New Jersey the present day. And I was like, 3-part structure, just like my first book, harmonious, great, we're done and dusted. And then Cambodia came along, and I was like, shit, what am I going to do with Cambodia? I was like, well, does it go here? Do I begin with it? No. Well, okay, I can put it there. No. I'll put it here. I'll stick it on the end. Makes sense. But then it was like, then the whole book was kind of listing the starboard. Didn't feel right. It was unbalanced. And that's when I finally figured out, okay, we need a denouement. We return to New Jersey and then launch into Congo. And that's when it kind of ended with this sort of 5-part structure that I think hangs together well, but I certainly wasn't what I thought I would start out with. And I think I've come away with this whole experience. This was a hard book to write. There was blood on the keyboard. But when we are listening to our story, when we're deeply involved in our story, when we're channeling even a fictional Belgrade, a fictional Matadi or whatever, we are accessing some kind of truth. And for those of you who read novels, and I hope you do, you know what I'm talking about, that we read fiction not to escape our lives, but actually to gain sort of a shortcut to our lives. That there's a kind of truth-telling that goes on in fiction that no non-fiction book can actually hope to approach. And I have this quotation on my office wall from Barry Lopez: lying is the opposite of story. And it keeps my engine going on those dark days when I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I think it's right. I think that story, deep story, real story, true story, is about as true as we can hope to tell. At least that's what I tell myself. So I'll end there. Thank you very much. So I think we can chat a bit. We can talk. Questions, comments, jokes. Yeah.
Speaking of museums, have you been in the Museum of Jurassic Technology in Los Angeles?
I have, yes.
Could you explain it to me?
For those who haven't been, the Museum of Jurassic Technology is a wonderful, crazy space in some kind of suburban LA street. You stumbled across it, and it presents these fake historical exhibits, like the famous one is, it has dead mice on toast, and it presents it as an old cure for bedwetting. And it has a nice little label card. This is what they used to give to kids who were bedwetting. They would serve them mice on toast. And it's so well done and so well presented with the dramatic lighting. And you're like, really? Is this true? You know? And that was, so that kind of gesture of using the language of curation, using the language of museum exhibits to present what is clearly a fiction, and that stutter step of like, wait, did they really get mice on toast? You know, I love that moment where the reader is in doubt of what is true and what is not. And I try to sort of replicate that in a way in the book using, again, some of the language of truth. So I provide images with captions and references, and I talk about a whole sort of scholarship around the book, you know, and I invented a fake bibliography, which took me 3 months. It's really hard to invent a bibliography because you have to get everything right. Because it's in Norwegian too. And I think, maybe I'm wrong here, but if you place your reader in that sort of demilitarized zone between truth and fiction, so they don't really know where they are, and they think, this is real. Where is that written? You know. Then they're vulnerable, you know. I get asked all the time as a novelist, which is, you know, I'm writing fiction. So, is T.S. Spivet based on you? You know, we want to know what's real. We want to know the boundaries of truth. It's just how we are. We want to know what happened, you know. And so I think if I keep you a little off kilter as a reader, and you're constantly searching for that, you know, the table, you're vulnerable to real story. You're vulnerable to something potentially transcendent happening. At least that's what I think. I don't know. Maybe I just piss you off. But I like playing with that. For the book launch we created in New York, we created in a pop-up museum of artifacts from the book for one night only, and we presented it as a real museum, the Museum of Arctic Puppetry. You can go to the website and create a website. Cool. And people walked in and they were like, "Oh, is this museum connected to your book?" And like some guy's like, "Who's the director of the Museum of Arctic Puppetry?" I was like, "He's not here tonight because he doesn't exist." You know that. But that I love that people were asking me that question. That that you can actually extend the world of the book into the real world. And it was so much crazy work, and it was only one night only. But I know something about that fleetingness was also kind of weirdly beautiful. I'll never do it again though. Next book party is just cocktails. Yeah.
Just a minor point. In Apocalypse Now, you said they were going down the Mekong River. Weren't they going up the river?
Thank you. Duly noted. I think they didn't know which direction they were headed, though. And I don't even know if it's the Mekong River anymore by the time they,
But it was up, right?
Sorry?
They were going up the river.
Yes. Thank you for correcting that. Any other corrections, questions? Yeah.
So, Cambodia and Congo, where was it reading Heart of Darkness and that storybook that led you to go to those places, or what inspired you to pick those places of all places?
Yeah, well, so the book concerns this kind of performance art group that from Arctic Norway that puts on these somewhat sort of insane conceptual shows for people who are suffering from genocide in the middle of the genocide. So my friend was working on a book in Cambodia, so I'd always been interested in Cambodia, and I think my interest in Congo was long-standing. So it wasn't I was like, let me pick the genocides of the world, but it was like these things sort of arose organically. But weirdly, I sort of, unfortunately, I would say, gained a sort of semi-expertise at gauging cultural post-traumatic stress syndrome of a people on a sort of large scale. Because I visited a lot of places where trauma had just recently happened and saw the different ways that cultures sort of grappled with it. So for instance, in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge was in power or in contributing to the power for decades afterwards. And many of them stayed in villages as kind of the big man who built all the houses in the village. So these villagers had this kind of crazy, complicated narrative of what happened, So like, 30 years ago, this guy was involved in killing your entire family, but since then, he's built your house and built all your neighbors' houses. So like, I think, if evil is always local, so is benevolence, and we have this kind of short-term memory. So there was this kind of I met a lot of people, and we were kind of asking, so I was like, what do you think about the Khmer Rouge? And they're like, oh, mistakes are made, and but look at my house, So it was this really, and I think that showed on a national scale that they had only tried these guys, last year. They were like 80-year-olds, The process of reconciliation in that country is crazy, it hasn't gone on. So there was a generation of people in real shock, I think, or multiple generations. Contrast that with Rwanda, where there was a mandated narrative of what happened. From the top down, the government said, this is what happened. April 25th, we remember what happened. Every village is forced to have a memorial for what happened. So there's this real sort of organized reconciliation and remembrance. Was it more effective? I don't know. I mean, it's still quite recent. If you kind of drill in, like, this is what we remember, it's a strange kind of, it's like forced cultural memory in some ways, but how do you get over anything like that, I think the thing with Rwanda is that people had to start living again together, right, side by side. So they were forced very quickly to come up with some kind of narrative. In the Balkans was, depending on where you were, the narrative shifted. I mean, who you were talking to. So it was this kind of shifting, stories are slippery there, which is, I think, one of the reasons I'm drawn to that area. I've always been drawn to their literature, but it's like, and they also tell stories in the face of great tragedy. They have this kind of black humor that keeps them alive, I think. So, any other questions?
Did you, when you started out, did you have an idea, or did you go looking for an idea?
Started out with the book.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning, so I didn't.
Oh no, I had a number of little ideas that I started with the character of Radar.
So you did have Radar.
Yeah, I had Radar. Radar was sort of in my grasp, and as I started massaging him, then I realized I had to go kind of outwards. And I had New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not one of those writers that maps things out. I probably should, because it would save me some time, but I believe in like being surprised on the paper. I used to do comedy improv, so if you give me a script on stage, I get very nervous that I'm going to get it wrong. But if I'm improving, there's no wrong answer. So that element of, yes, and we are in a Chinese restaurant, and yes, there is a floating dragon, that kind of building on the story is a little bit how I write and how I, it's like I'm improvising myself in a weird way,
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall what happened with the Khmer Rouge. Did they disband or what?
They, some of them went back into power, some of them, they kind of, they weren't held accountable until recently, and most of them sort of lived out their lives. Some of them became local chieftains. The current president has had ties with the Khmer Rouge. I mean, it's like, there was no, like, you are evil, you are not, it was this kind of slow bleed back into, they were eventually outlawed as a party in the 90s. So this is 20 years later. But that didn't necessarily mean anything for the individuals.
No trials like Nuremberg.
The trials happened last year, and it was
Oh.
only for the 3 top remaining people who are alive. And even this was very controversial, But it wasn't, no. I mean, 1976, 78, there wasn't anything in like 79, like we'll bring them all to, because, that it was, the history there is so complicated, but Vietnam had invaded, and China and Russian were being pulled in, and Thailand was helping because they didn't want Vietnam to take over the whole, the whole area. So the Russians were back, siding with. So there was all this Cold War sort of alignment going on, and this was all in the wake, of course, of the Vietnam War. So yeah, it's crazy that it's, to me, it boggles the mind. I mean, if you read about the Khmer Rouge, what they did, they just they were like, we're going to start history over again, and anyone with eyeglasses will shoot because you might be from the West. The book, I think one of the central preoccupations with the book is, what is identity? How do we define our own identity? How do other people define us? What are the criteria for, oh, you're the same as me, you're different than me? And in every place you go in the world, that's been such a shifting definition, right? In the U.S., a lot of it's deeply race-based. In the former Yugoslavia, it was what's your last name? What religion are you? What do I think you look like? And in Cambodia, it was do I think you're smart? Do I think you're Western? Then you're not like us. So we do this as humans. The reasons why, the criteria why always changes, but we like to categorize ourselves, and that's what I was trying to chip away at with my little miner's tool, I think. One more question? This is your chance. Yeah.
You had an article, I think it was in the New York Times Magazine, about a trip to Scandinavia or Norway, I think,
Yeah.
right? Was that part of the research for this book, or is that the searching for your roots kind of thing?
Yeah, that came after the book.
Yeah.
But it was in the wake of me being obsessed with the Arctic and the relationship between light and people. And I went into that article with the kind of pseudo anthropological question of how do you not go crazy during the winter and the summer? Because it's you can think of the year in the Arctic as one long day, where the night is the nighttime, where the winter is the nighttime and the summer is the daytime. And I'm like, how does this not drive you insane? So I was asking everyone, what? So what happens? How do you survive, man? And they looked at me like I was so weird, they were like, yeah, I sleep a little bit less in the summer, and I know some guys who go crazy when it gets light because they think they're invincible and they drive their motorcycle off the mountain. But they're generally we just survive, why? They looked at me like I was asking them I was asking them the question so you sleep every night? When it gets dark, you sleep every night? Yeah, that's what we do. So they just it was part of their reality, and that's what I kind of realized, is that humans are incredibly adaptive. We adapt to our situation, whether it's 24 hours of light or 24 hours of dark, we deal. We drink some wine, probably.
So you wrote the part where Radar's family travels up there before you went there?
No, I've been to Norway a bunch of times, and I've been to Arctic Norway a bunch of times. So I had some contacts when I wrote the Times piece. I went back there, and yeah, that was part of the reason I was interested in writing it. And my next Times piece, which is going to come out, I think next fall, is about Sarajevo. So, because I want to sort of bring. It's crazy when you write for the travel section for the Times, you actually have a big effect on tourism. After that Norway piece, U.S. tourism to Norway went up 20%.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird.
Well, that's because everybody thinks it's the hip thing to be doing now. Oh,
Maybe.
I saw it in the Times.
Yeah,
Everybody's going
yeah.
there.
It's really expensive though. It's not that hip. But I would like to maybe in my own small way siphon people to Sarajevo, because it's one of the most amazing cities, and I think people still have this weird stigma against it. But it's the collision of so many cultures.
It's
and
wonderful
yeah,
book.
yeah. Oh,
It's
thank you.
really, really nicely done.
Thank you.
Now I've got to read a whole bunch more books.
Thank you. Then I guess I did my job. Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with, when you're traveling, how do you deal with the language? You just
Yeah, that's a
rely
really
on-
good question. So usually I travel with people in the know, either through some way, the friends or people that guides or so forth. And there's a language gap. There was always a language gap, And that's, I think, where a little bit of like the leap of the novelist happens, you know. There's a lot of like different languages sprinkled up throughout the book, and I sort of had to talk to people who, you know, there's a lot of like Serbian swear words because Serbians are the best swearers in the entire world. And I had to really sort of get creative with that and you know, get the language exactly right. But I think what's more the point is when I'm putting it on the page, you know, it's a little bit like a magician, right? I give you enough, I give you just a few details that, the right details. John Gardner calls them proofs. They're so specific and so authentic, even if they're made up, that you as a reader can't question that we're anywhere else except Sarajevo, 6 a.m. walking down an alleyway. You know, I give you just the right things, and you're like, yeah, of course. You can't question them. You know, the trick is what are those things? You know, and how do you do it? And when is too much, and what is just enough? You know. So, but language is always a big issue. But I think that's one of the questions in the book, like what is language? There's a central book in the book that people are kind of obsessed with that's completely in Norwegian, and no one can read it, and they're trying to figure out what it says, you know. So it's this kind of decoding process is part of what we do, I think. So.
It's a real Norwegian,
What?
not fake Norwegian, real Norwegian.
The fictional book is in real Norwegian. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Again, where's like the real, yeah. And in which Norwegian? There's two different Norwegians, actually. There's two different kinds of Norwegian. So. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Really.